Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the PPI Leadership Lounge. I am honored today, during our Black History Month series to be speaking with Stephon Scott. Great to have you. Looking forward to having this conversation. How are you today, sir?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm feeling great today. It's my honor to serve and it's my honor to be here with you today.
So start off by telling us, what are some of your core values? What would you say your core values are that drives the work that you do and the difference that you're making?
What drives me most is the desire to serve. Of course, leaning towards the eradication of all forms of discrimination. And that notion of eradicating all forms of discrimination is consistent with the language within the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the regulation that was promulgated pursuant to it. So this notion of serving from a leadership perspective allows me to listen. Listening to learn is another part of my leadership style, so to speak. What's of value? One, to serve. Serving for what purpose? For equitable access to opportunities for everyone.
When you think about your leadership and you think about the impact and the things that you're doing, what's most rewarding to you as a leader? What do you find most rewarding?
There are two things that are most rewarding for me. I don't like conflict, but I'm comfortable within conflict. What makes it very rewarding is to know that there are people that are equally committed to resolving the issue, the journey towards resolving it, but then developing folks along the way, as well as I'm developing myself. So if you have a leader that's not willing to learn, you may have an excellent manager, but you may not have a leader. So my willingness to learn, but my willingness to also share the knowledge that I've learned and watch folks develop and getting them what they need, that taken together is what I enjoy the most. Khalid, I think it's the journey that I enjoy the most.
What do you find most challenging in leading, and if you can share an example where you experienced a challenge as a leader, and what did you do to overcome it?
I have many, many examples, but I'll use one particular to the National Institutes of Health. So I was initially hired there to establish its first ever reasonable accommodation program, and that's to provide equitable access to individuals with disabilities. So when I arrived there, they had one way of doing it, and there were people who were entrenched in that way of doing it, although it raised legal risks for the organization, as well as it was not effectively serving the people it intended to serve. I'm dropped into a space that I'm unfamiliar with, so I'm listening to learn to see where we may agree or disagree, but I noticed there was a lot of intransigence on the part of the people who had a vested interest in keeping it the way it was. I went and I met with them personally, and I came bearing the law, but I also came bearing some anecdotal information and some results of some complaints that had been filed. You notice some people will enter a space saying, come armed with X, come armed with Y into a meeting. Notice I said come bearing. And as I started listening to them, I started to understand more about why they were so vested in it. And then I left them with, where you have authority to assume that risk, then you'll have to, of course, address the consequences that come with that. They said, no, we don't want to assume that risk, but we want to figure out how can we keep A and B while we change to C. But they really appreciated the fact that we must accomplish C. But at the end of the day, they heard me, they became champions for what we were doing, and they became part of the resolution. That resulted in a great, robust program being established, having them realize that there was an inherent conflict of interest in their role. They relinquished that. I hold that up as a great accomplishment because my willingness to engage, but their willingness to listen. Once you've gotten that, now you're on this other path.
Why do you think a lot of leaders don't do that? More leaders do that.
It could be this notion of a cultural insecurity within particular professions. So if a person's in their job and they're made to feel unsure whether they're going to keep that job, the person is consistently insecure. So you're never going to get the best of that leader. And typically, since they're insecure, they're saying, I'm going to flex my authority. You can notice, even if a leader has an idea, and so some leaders will say, why should I have to sell it? I'm in charge, do what I say. If you have an idea, don't you want it perfected? And just like coal turns to diamonds over an extended period of time, that is analogous to an idea. But if you're leading through authoritarianism, it's going to stay a piece of coal. If they want it to be a diamond, it's going to take this iterative process. You're asking your team, okay, I have this idea. This is the mandate that's come down. What are your thoughts on this? The very ask of that question starts to reshape that piece of code. We have to see our team as people. If we see them as, simply means to our end and not ends unto themselves, then we've made a huge mistake.
We're celebrating Black History Month, and what impact do you feel your leadership has had on the African American community and communities at large?
So what I believe is the impact, my impact on the African American community. I believe that my impact is best felt at this point by modeling the behavior. We can't be it until we see it. So a lot of African American youth have seen me or the community period and in three primary spaces. And one is while I served my country as a soldier, did that honorably. Two, while in Albuquerque, New Mexico, as a student, as a scholar, et cetera, modeling the professionalism. So I think especially there where the population is very small, but it's had a significant impact because they can start to see themselves not just as victims of racism, but also as scholars. One thing I think my impact has been to the African American community to keep moving, that we cannot just sit and we cannot take things for granted, that we keep moving. And I think that the impact is best felt through me modeling the behavior. Two, the notion of resiliency, to borrow my sister's term. They get to see that, they get to read about it, but also to interact with me and other leaders. I've mentored several young African-American professionals and some older professionals, quite frankly. And so that willingness to mentor, but also a willingness to be mentored.
And my apologies for not acknowledging you as a combat veteran. If there's anything you want to share from that experiences, please feel free to do so.
I've experienced racism and discrimination while serving in the military. While on the other hand, realizing there's a bigger issue at play here. It's the institutional and structural forms that we have to be present in order to eradicate. That's number one. Number two, it was my honor to serve because it is our country. Where we are is where we are. I'm talking about geographically. And I'm talking about also this sense of belonging. We should never allow racism or racists to alienate us from ourselves. So when I serve, I'm serving our nation.
I always ask, leaders such as yourself, 3 pieces of advice that you would give to aspiring leaders.
One is listen to learn. Number 2, be humble. Be humble in that space of leadership. Positively influence those that you're leading while providing them the tools that they need to succeed. There is nothing worse than asking someone to do something and not providing them the tools they need to do it, and then critiquing them negatively for not accomplishing it. Finally, the number 3 thing I would say as a leader is always grow, always be learning. Always be bettering yourself, because when you're bettering yourself, by extension, you're bettering those you lead.
Wow.
So those are the 3 things that I would tell someone coming into leadership, that you're in it to serve.
What do you want your leadership legacy to be? What do you want it to sound like? What do you want it to look like?
I think that I would like my legacy to be that I loved God, I loved my family, and that I was an advocate for the eradication of all forms of racism and discrimination. Unlike an ally, I was an advocate, that I took on the issue as if it were my own.
Well, Stephon, based on what I've read, based on what I've heard about you, based on this conversation, you're living your legacy. You're living your legacy. We say that to leaders all the time. The legacy you want, you have to live it. It doesn't just happen at the end of your life. You live your life in service of others and also in complement of your legacy. I want to thank you for really taking this time to share a little bit about you during this, this month of Black History Month. I learned so much from you. I look forward to talking to you more in the future. Stay tuned. We have other leaders that we're talking to, but we appreciate them all and the work that they're doing in service of their country, in service of the African-American community and in the community at large. So Stephon, thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you more.